Senior Instructional Designer for Open SUNY out of System Administration in the Office of the Provost in Auburn. Right? My main job, I've worked a lot on the OSCAR rubric, if you have any experience with that. I travel around the state working with different campuses to help implement online programs. Right? And one of the things that we are starting to look at a little bit more, I think everybody is accessibility. And you guys know all of this, you know all that stuff. 12,000 online courses that we work with in SUNY. I don't know if you heard the Chancellor's speech a couple days ago. We are now Open SUNY 2.0, which is very exciting. And Open is now the optimized personal education network. So it is a brave new world as of yesterday. Yeah, thank you. Now, where I work for a group called COAT, the Center for Online Teaching Excellence. We're located over here in this way upper left-hand corner of what we call our digital DNA. Alfred's not what we call an Open SUNY Plus campus, so I'm not sure how much familiarity all of you have with some of the jargon that I'm using, like COAT and digital DNA and all that. So you know all this before.
We have done both the initial and then the SUNY roundtable. So
okay, so you're getting this. So
we should be an Open SUNY Plus campus.
You should be, all but being dry. And some of my thunder here honestly was stolen this morning. So I'll skip quickly through some of this. You know, why do we talk about accessibility? We talk about, you know, all the reasons, which are all good reasons. You know, that there's a number of different laws. What these are all flagships or state systems that have been sued, that have had complaints brought against them by Department of Justice, by SUNY has current complaints against them, right? I am sure that, you know, NYU has complaints against them. I am sure that we will eventually join this list. And I fully expect that when there is a complaint brought against SUNY that we will be found wanted, right? That our courses are not all as accessible as they should be. It's nobody's fault. It's something that we have, you know, we've been doing online learning at Open SUNY SLN for 20-something years, and it's never been something that we honestly have stressed, right? It's never been something that was a key pillar of our new faculty training. It's never something that, you know, looking back, what we should have done is, you know, incorporated these principles of accessibility from the very beginning when a faculty member is first developing his or her course. It's not something we did. We're in a position where we're playing catch-up, right? We understand that all of your courses are not going to be fully accessible by Memorial Day. You know, that's not, there's no, you know, expectation of that, but what we want to do is start educating faculty, working with campuses, providing resources to say, all right, how can we get to that standard, right? We understand that we have an issue, let's not make the problem worse, and let's start chipping away at and improving our courses, right? So that's sort of our approach. And one way that we're sort of doing this is with what we call the OSCAR rubric, which stands for the Open SUNY COAT Quality Review. We love branding things, right? OSCAR is an acronym made up of two other acronyms. It's actually Open is now an acronym, SUNY is an acronym, COAT is an acronym, so technically it expands out to like a full paragraph. I don't know if any of you, do any of you have experience have used the OSCAR rubric before? Just a couple. Have any of you used QM, Quality Matters? Good. Or the Blackboard Exemplary Course Rubric? Yeah. You know, these are all, there's a lot of similarities between all these, right? I'm partial to OSCAR. But I'll talk to you a little bit about how ours is different, where ours is the same, and how this ties into accessibility, right? So, the OSCAR rubric is, there's two pieces of it. If you notice that in the thing I gave you, there were two separate rubrics. One is a design rubric, one is an accessibility rubric, right? They both happen to, just by coincidence, have 37 standards each. We're actually working on integrating them into one common rubric for campuses that want to use that, and I actually have copies of it that I'm going to distribute at the end of this. It's still very much in the draft phase, but I'd love to get feedback on that. This was a long process to create this rubric. The biggest thing we try to emphasize with all this is that it is not an It is in no means an assessment. It is not an evaluation. It's a learning tool, right? There are no scores, right? There's no, oh, Dan's course got an 83 and Ginger's course got an 84, therefore Ginger is better, right? There's none of that. There's no scores, there's no passing, there's no failing, right? QM has different scores and it certifies that you've met a certain standard. We don't certify courses. The goal of the OSCE rubric is really to identify best practices that you're already doing and figure out a way that you can share those with others and figure out items where you can improve your course and then providing you the resources, the ideas on how to sort of get that in motion. Okay? So there is no expectation that every standard you meet at the highest level to begin with. We went through a long process that involved a lot of different campus people in creating this rubric. One of the nicest things about it, I think, is that it's all openly licensed, right? It's all Creative Commons. Our code, we have a couple thousand lines of code on the back end. It's all up on GitHub. It's all open, and campuses are encouraged to customize it to fit their specific needs. Okay? So what I mean by that is we have some campuses that have a real focus on international learning. And they added a couple standards that had to deal with that, right? And we have some that are really focused on competency-based learning, right? So they can add or subtract, or maybe this standard disagrees with 22A, whatever that happens to be, right? That's fine. You can remove that from your version of the OSCE rubric, right? So the idea is really that the OSCE rubric needs to work for your specific campus for people to buy in, right? We have some campuses using just the design standards. We have some campuses using just the accessibility standards. We have some campuses using quality matters and the accessibility standards. So we really see a lot of different ways that campuses are using this. I think we have 34 different SUNY campuses right now who are using the OSCE rubric, not counting obviously. And then there's also a number of private colleges that we've been going around and spreading the word and are using this. Now, this is what I said, and I'll go into it in a sec. Like we said, it really needs to be a process where the campus looks at it and says, this fits our goals and our needs, right? You'll see there's no scores on here. It's just, people will go through and put this, and it's really focused on improvement. I'll jump into a copy of it right now. Code words for all our different versions of it. Because there's a lot of them. All right, so here's an example of a dashboard, which is what perhaps members of your instructional design staff, someone in the school, it's a way to sort of monitor the overall trends on your campus, right? These are not percentages of standard being met. This is percentages of the rubric being filled out, okay? So when I see that this is 192, that means the ID has completely filled out his or her part, the faculty member filled out their part, and then, in this case, there was a third reviewer who looked at it. How you set it up is up to you, right? We have some campuses that use this rubric as simply as a self-serve option, right? Where they say, all right, here's this link, you download a copy of it, you look at your own course, you apply to your own course, right? Nobody on our campus ever sees the results. I'm just going to set these rubrics over here on the table, and if you happen to pick one up, then that's awesome, right? And you can certainly do it that way. We have some campuses that do have a more formalized peer review process, right? Where maybe we'll have one person, two other faculty members reviewing, and you compare notes. We have some campuses, like I think you were saying, where the instructional designer might conduct a review and the faculty member might conduct a review, and then you have a sort of conference where you say, oh, I thought this met the standard, I thought this needed a minor improvement, and then it's a really good opportunity for a talking point. I can run analytics on the back end of this. I won't do it right now, but I can run analytics on the back end of it, which is really powerful, and it will show me that, for instance, my campus tends to do really well in assessment, but struggles or needs additional reinforcement in creating class community, right? So you can run these sort of analytics and say, all right, here's where I need to target my professional development. here is where we already are a model campus. How can we scale these best practices to somebody else? Okay, so it really gives you a nice sort of longitudinal view of it. I'm trying to think which one has good information. Let's go into this one. These are fake courses. Now, all right. There's a fair amount of coding on the back end. Not supposed to. All right, so when you're going through and doing this, this one's not totally filled out, but the way it would work is you would go through and you would simply mark, what was sufficiently present, what was a minor enhancement, a moderate enhancement, or a major enhancement. All right, by that we mean, for instance, if the contact information for the instructor is missing, it might take me a minute to put that into my course, right? That would certainly count as a minor enhancement that's needed, right? If the entire organization system of my course needs to be rethought and half my activities don't align with my learning objectives, that's a much bigger activity, and that would fall under the major enhancements, all right? One of the nice things about this is it's designed where, as a self-summer instrument, so if here's where you will put ideas on what to do, and if you come over here and click need ideas, what it will do, it'll give you a list of, we call them annotations and activations. It'll give you further information about what that standard is, right? What are you really trying to get at? Where's the research that supports this idea? And then activations, it'll give you examples. For instance, if it says that, computer course includes links to relevant campus policies on plagiarism, computer use, student grievances, blah, 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 right? It will give you templated examples of that sort of stuff. Right? And it will give you sort of information on how to get started. It'll give you links. If it talks about formative assessment, there'll be links to information about rubrics and links to information about that. So even if you're going through and doing this on your own, it'll give you a lot of information on how to sort of address some of these issues. Now the reason why I bring this up and talk about it here is we also have this accessibility rubric. And I'll shrink down my size a little bit if I can. Be a little bit small. That's okay. All of you have it in front of you. I forgot that. Now, this grew out of, so when we first started Open SUNY a couple years ago, we actually had a memorandum prepared for us by SUNY's Office of General Counsel about considerations for making your Open SUNY courses compliant. Fortunately, that memo never really made it out of the draft stage, I'm pretty sure. But we did take that information and turn it into this rubric, right? So these originally came from SUNY's Office of General Counsel. It's not UDL, right? It's not the stuff that we were hearing about this morning. This focuses on compliance, right? So this would be a lower standard, I would say, than some of the UDL stuff. There certainly is, this isn't AAA, this is probably AA. There is certainly more you could do, but this is an adequate place to start, right? As you go through this, like I said, there's 37 standards, and it looks a little bit intimidating, but it doesn't necessarily have to be, because these are grouped. For instance, this one has to do with color, right? So, color should not be used as the primary, it should not be used to convey important information. It shouldn't be the primary way to convey information. So when we were talking in the last session about, how do I know how to do these things, right? Some of that, I think, is here. So when people were, I cringed a little bit and said, oh, you can make some of them red and you can make some of them blue. That's, that's not really what we want. You can use red and you can use blue, but also say the one with the asterisk is this, right? Or the one with the cross is this, or the one that's italicized is this, right? So use the color and use a non-color alternative, right? And it really tries to go into a lot of this stuff. Page background should not. Some of it is very practical. Sans serif font, standard size 12. There are no SUNY police coming in and making sure that no this, right? That is not what this is. This is best practice guidelines that we hope you take and implement. No one is checking up on if a campus does this or anything like that. But we hope that you take this, and even if you don't hit all of the standards, that you slowly start to make your course more compliant, more accessible to students, right? Things like a hyperlink text should make sense out of context. Avoid using click here. What that means is, you know, when you're using a screen reader, and if you've never actually used a screen reader, it's a really enlightening experience. It's really difficult. But you can tab through sort of from link to link, and if you read the text of a link, it'll read the text of a link, and if the text of the link is just click here, that tells the person who's using it pretty much no information, right? So you might, instead of saying click here, it might be an underline, the link might say a pamphlet on how to identify whatever. Right? Little things like that can really help make it better. And you know, semantic structure should be maintained. People don't always understand what that means. And I don't have the time to go through every one of the standards, but what I mean by semantic structure is when you're using a screen reader, it can skip from heading to heading to heading to heading, right? Or subheading to subheading to subheading. If you simply take your heading and make it bold and increase the font size, the screen reader doesn't understand that that's a heading. Okay? Conversely, if you are using Microsoft Word and you change at the top to heading 1, right, it will look the same, and the screen reader understands that it's a heading and allows the user to skip between. It also will do all sorts of things like create tables of contents and do also, you know, ancillary things like that. That's what we're talking about when we say it's semantic structure, that things are used the way they should. Tables are okay, but they should be used for tabular data, right? If you have a table of data, absolutely use a table. If you're using a table just for layout, there's better ways to do it. Okay? And there's a lot of people who can help you set your course up, and there's a lot of resources online. Some of those resources are available through here, through the Needs Ideas link on the right-hand side. We're constantly fleshing that out. When I say we, it's not me. It is a lot of colleagues who I have at campuses, you know, who have been a tremendous help to me. People at Empire State, Buffalo State, and the Fact2 group on accessibility, and you know, there's been a ton of people who have donated their time to helping to provide resources on this sort of thing. You know, and again, some of these are more relevant than others. These 6 have to do with PowerPoint. If you don't have a PowerPoint presentation, then you can skip it, right? Not a big deal. Some of these have to do with tables. If you don't have tables in your course, you can skip it. This has to do with if you have things that require timed response, right? If you don't have a timed response, you can skip it. So it's not quite as intimidating as maybe it looks. If nothing else, it is a good place to get started and sort of help you understand what some of the expectations are. Slides should have simple, non-automatic transitions. What we mean by that is, you know those PowerPoint presentations where after 10 seconds it automatically goes on to the next slide, and then after 5 seconds it automatically goes on, and it sort of runs on autopilot? Well, if I'm a student with disabilities, I may need to stop it. If I'm a student, period, I may need to stop it and not have it run on ahead before I'm ready. So, you know, we try to avoid automatic transitions. Okay? Let the student control when the slide goes to the next slide. Right? Not a big deal, but it can make it a lot easier for your students. There's a lot of talking here about any non-text content needs to have a text alternative. Okay? That's a big one. I know what we're talking about there is we're talking about alt tags on images, and we're talking about captioning video. There's a lot of captioning services out there. I don't know what budgets are on different campuses. Student assistants can help with captioning, right? YouTube can help with captioning. You'll have to touch it up. We use a transcript service. You can get it for under $1 a minute. Right? You can get your work transcribed for less than $1 a minute, which isn't so bad. And you know, yes, it can add up, but it's sort of the cost of doing business.
Yep. Real quick question. I'm at $2.30. Who are you using? Or is it the bulk discount?
Some of it's a bulk discount, and we use a company called Rev.com. which I like a lot.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm a free place. Sorry about it.
Yeah, no, that's
I
okay.
heard a lower cost.
Yeah, you can get it for under, I don't know how much you guys pay.
We pay $159 an hour.
$159 an hour?
Yeah, so $1.59.
We pay like 85 cents a minute.
So I don't know what
That's like $2.
We use AutoSync technologies for
Yeah.
their integration with.
You use AutoSync, which is nice. And you know, and what AutoSync will do, what we're talking about, what AutoSync will do is you simply upload your video into the system. The computer, the sentient computer, will do all the work of captioning it and uploading the captions. It's exactly the timestamps and get it all correct, right? And you don't have to retouch it.
Right, like there's a faculty member puts, they upload it into the media library, they let me know that it's captioning. I click a button and then it just appears. I don't have to do anything.
You know, and yeah, I totally understand that some of this stuff is a pain, and some of the stuff costs money that we would rather be spending on other stuff, but it really is an expectation, it is the law, it is, you know, important that we do this sort of thing, and, you know, we're behind, we haven't been doing it for a while. So, bottom line is there's a lot of transcription services out there, and you can get pretty good deals. We're actually in the process of negotiating a larger SUNY-wide contract, which would help drive the cost down a lot, and then you could simply buy it right off the catalog instead of having that. I know procurement can be tough at different campuses, and we can help out with some of that a little bit. And if you have work-study students, right? So perfect. So there's a lot of good things going on here. The next sort of, one of the next evolutions of OSCAR, we think, is going to be modularizing this a little bit more, right? So faculty member hits OSCAR and answers a little bit of information about their course, such as, do you have PowerPoints in your course, right? Do you have, do you use third-party tools? Do you use this, that? And it will deliver to you the relevant standards, right? So you won't have to deal with standards that aren't relevant to you. In addition to the accessibility, we have standards that are specific for, do you guys, what do you call them, J-term? Short-term courses, right? Those full course in 3 weeks. Well, there are different best practices for teaching in that than there are in teaching a 15-week course, obviously, right? So we have standards for that. You know, standards for if you're doing a large lecture class. I don't think here at Alfred you have too many, like extra large lecture halls, 250 students. You know, but plenty of campuses do. And how do you teach in that environment? How do you teach it with blended learning? We're working with the people down at UCF, University of Central Florida, who developed this great blend kit materials. They're working with us to develop a special rubric for blended learning, right? Blended learning where you're still meeting face-to-face, but you're incorporating a lot of the web technologies into it, right? A lot of it also has to do with third-party tools you use, right? If you go through and you look at, remember that big slide with all the state seals on it? A lot of them, a number of them got dinged for using third-party tools that were inaccessible, right? MyLabs, Wiley Plus, Cengage Now. I think I'm getting the name wrong, but you know what I mean. These digital workbooks, you've got to make sure they have to be, the expectations that they are accessible, right? And you can ask vendors for what's called a VPAT, right? VPAT, what is it? Voluntary
Point after try.
A-T.
Voluntary product
Sorry.
accessibility template?
I think that's correct. Voluntary product, that's what I said. Voluntary product accessibility template. And basically what it is all of these companies are working with state colleges that have all the same rules. And you know, they essentially, this form asks them to respond to how are you meeting all of these standards, right? And they'll explain to you, you know, oh, we meet this, we meet this, we meet this, we don't meet this. You know, so you can ask vendors for a VPAT. You can ask, you know, and you can work with vendors that provide more accessible technology, right? And you know, and that will pressure more vendors to do it. But yet, you know, like there's a number of examples of people using specifically some of the MyLab stuff where the institution got in trouble because the materials weren't accessible to all the students. It's flash-based. Questions on any of this? Yes?
I like what I heard this morning about what's good for one is good for all.
Yeah.
So I've taught on campus 10 years, and now I teach full-time, full-time exclusively. And my beef with this for the longest time is we have a rubric for online, but we don't have rubrics for on-campus teaching. And I'm not just talking about this accessibility, but like your first.
Yeah, course design stuff.
Nobody goes in and makes sure that these elements are in some format are held to the same standard for an on-campus course as they are for online.
I think you're right. I think that online learning is now held to a higher standard, you know, than because it was newer, because there was questions about its efficiency and its efficacy and, you know, its value. And I think it's easier sometimes when the course is all laid out there to accurately judge. But you're right. I agree that online learning is sometimes held to a higher standard on some of this stuff. I think that I teach online, right? And I used to teach face-to-face, I don't anymore, for community college, Schenectady County Community College. And I think that teach online has made me a better instructor, you know? It has made me think out what I'm going to do more thoroughly, you know, by necessity. It's made me think all that out and made me document my things better and made me explore different pathways and ways of doing things. I 100% agree that, you know, a lot of this stuff is just good teaching.
Almost as if you never do a rubric for.
Well, the issue is you can't require, you know, it's all campus-based, right? So we can push something out to campuses and say, this is best practices. You know, about half of the student campuses right now use this, right? And that number's going up, but about half of them don't. Some of them use QM, quality matters. Some of them have homegrown ones. Some of them have none, right? We get, rightfully so, we get a lot of pushback on this from faculty who are concerned that it is SUNY telling you how you need to teach your course or design your course, right? That's the common pushback we get, and I totally understand that. You do have the academic freedom to teach your course in the way that you see fit, absolutely. And there is nobody checking up on any of this. We really try to stick to course design, right? There's a lot of elements that go into making a course good, from, you know, the way the course is delivered, to the content of the course, to how the course is designed. And we really try to stick to course design, right? I am not an expert in almost anything. Archaeology, right? I can't tell you how, if this is a good archaeology course, I can't tell you if what you're saying is true or not, but I can tell you if, you know, I get lost when I go through it. And I can tell you if I'm clear about what the expectations are for my work, and I can tell you how to contact the instructor if I need help. You know, I can speak knowledgeably about the design of the course, even if I have no idea about the actual content. So we go to great lengths to reinforce the idea that we're not looking at the content of the course. We're simply looking at the presentation and how it is designed, right? We're not saying, oh, you need to have more modern sources. Oh, you need to have more multicultural, you know, points of view. I'm not saying that. We're talking about, does the student understand what the expectation is? Can they navigate the course cleanly? Is the course compliant? Right? Will we get to a point where we have a rubric that talks about course delivery? I don't know. I think it will be. I think there will be value there. I think it is a. There'd have to be a lot of stakeholders involved in the discussion, the faculty senates and the unions and everybody, and, you know, I think it would be a long process to reach consensus on that. But most of this stuff is fairly neutral, I hope. You know, most of it's fairly neutral. Students have an opportunity to get to know the instructor. Technical skills are required. The other thing that we're working on, that was a good question. Other questions on anything else? Yes, sir.
Just comment. What you're telling us basically is we're creating a learning quality gap between campus-based in-classroom learning and online learning.
I mean, this is not an evaluation, right? Think of it as a best practice document, right?
Well, but you see the paradigm shift from teaching to learning is vastly incomplete, And I've just sat for 2 hours with a group of very bright faculty members on another campus. And to get them to think in terms of their courses and their course design from a learner's perspective and from multiple learners' perspectives was impossible. Because in their graduate school preparation, pedagogy in the subject matter was outlawed. That's a challenge out there.
That's a huge challenge that we work with, because we work with subject matter experts, people who are all really strong learners and have advanced degrees, and could have learned the material of almost any way you present it, right? And that's not my students at Schenectady Community College, right? So a lot of this is working with people who are brilliant and subject matter experts about some of the basics of pedagogy and teaching, right? And hopefully there are similar programs in place for face-to-face instructors. The first time that someone teaches face-to-face. Our focus is in the online sphere, but I think Chris Price runs some of that out of the CPT. I think there are some similar, Chris Price from Brown. I think there are some similar programs in place for face-to-face instructors, but it's not what we focus on as much. I know I'm skirting the question, right? Yes?
Hey,
Yep.
I have a question. So if I review course
Yep.
using Oscar,
Yes.
and so then I would share the link with the instructor so that they could view it, is there an easy way for them to print it so they can see all the comments? Because I actually type a lot of comments into that box after other people.
It's like I hate you to ask that. On the right-hand side here is what we call the action plan. And the action plan, and this is a bad example because there aren't actually any plans.
Points for spelling midichlorians right too, by the way.
This is my colleague Dave who did this. I don't understand what any of this is. Here's an example of the action plan. And you'll see that it has, what it does is it aggregates all the comments made on the different rubrics into
And it says which
something like
quality
this.
indicator.
Yep.
Yeah.
So for standard 2B, one person said this, one person said this, and so forth, right? And it's printable. Over here, where it says time to fix, that's our best guess, right? On how long, we went through and made a guess about, if you need help on standard 3A, it might take you 45 minutes. Obviously there's 100 variables that will impact that. This is our best guess. Campuses can customize any of this that they want. But what it does is it allows you to sort of prioritize, right? All right, I'm going to address the simple fixes. I'm going to address the most important fixes. So yes, so on the right-hand side, you will get this action plan that lists out in a printable format all of these sort of comments that we're doing.
Sending an email on faculty member and read them.
Perfect, my work here is done. Now, other comments before I shift gears slightly. So what we're working on right now, and I'll show you, we're in the process, and this is very much draft. Oh, thank you very much. You'll notice there's probably 50 spelling mistakes, and the formatting is a disaster. We're working on, our goal now is to combine these two rubrics into one. Because, we heard comments from several campuses about, about why do you separate them out? Is one subservient to the other, and so forth. And so one of our efforts right now is to create what we're calling an integrated rubric. You get notice rubrics. To create what we're calling the integrated rubric, where we're trying to sort of meld these two sets of standards into one. Right? This is very much a work in progress. If you are interested in working on any of this sort of stuff, or providing feedback on any of this, we would love to hear from you. Right? There's plenty of work to go around. There's plenty of opportunities to get involved if you're interested in this and you want to help the formation of this. We're right in the middle of sort of trying to figure out, you know, how to make this a better document. We're hoping to release version 3 of OSCAR in probably May, right? And that's what this is going to be a part of, right? We're also working, you know, and you can see it's a bit of a mess right now, but we're working on, originally there were 74 quality standards. We've got it down to like 56, right, by identifying redundancies and identifying ones that we thought were not needed. We even added a couple extra new ones, like this one. But there's a lot of opportunities to get involved in this sort of thing if you are interested in field testing this and piloting any of this. We have collected, you know, we talked earlier about how different campuses have adapted the rubric to their own needs. One really good piece of feedback we've been able to get is we have collected those rubrics, right? It's really valuable feedback for us to see, oh, 3 campuses thought it was important to add something on experiential learning, right? And 2 campuses cut out the one on OER, right? Open Education Resources. That was a less popular standard, but that's all right. But that's really good feedback for us to say, all right, do we need to add something about experiential learning? Do we reevaluate whether an OER standard is appropriate in this rubric, right? So we're definitely still accepting any feedback that, this isn't funny, we had a long debate about whether we should say course is free of grammatical and spelling errors. Seems really obvious. The reason that came about is we ran into a couple courses that had a lot of grammatical and spelling errors, and we didn't know where to indicate that on the rubric. We didn't have a place where we could sort of put that as a note, so we added that in there somewhere. You know, 11B is getting back to what you were just presenting on with your templated course, right? That a consistent, uncluttered layout is established. Consistent color scheme, icon layout. Related content organized together. Now, related content organized together could mean all the discussions together, all the tests together, all the you know, videos together and so forth. It also could mean all of week 1 together, and all of week 2 together, and all of week 3 together, right? So there's flexibility in here. We make a huge effort to try to tell people, like, yes, it's 74 standards or 54, whatever you're using, but look at the standards. I guarantee you're doing almost all of them already, right? I'm sure you already have, I would hope, some sort of consistent layout in your course and a logical way to navigate the course. You know, you've told students how to contact you, and you've told students when work is due and stuff like that. But it's really not as intimidating as it might look at first. Like I said, there's a lot of different opportunities. There's workshops on using the OSCAR rubric that are available to you. There's webinars that don't cost anything. There's opportunities if you want to review someone else's course, right? If you want to serve as a course reviewer, there's a small network, it's not huge at this point, of people who are reviewing each other's courses. You would probably review some random person's course from Niagara, or from SUNY Poly, or from Stony Brook, or whatever, and you can have your course reviewed as well, right? We do have a sort of a pool of people who have gone through OSCAR training, right, and are prepared, and you know, we can match you up. You can say, oh, you know, I want another nursing instructor to review my course. Okay, well, we found someone over at Stony Brook who is willing to help out, right? Or, you know, I'm willing to review something. So there's opportunities to have your course reviewed, to review other people's courses, all sorts of things like that. And if you have programming skills, we desperately need people who can help us build out the back end of some of this. Excuse me. Questions on any of this stuff? Oh, look at that. I think, what time are we supposed to end? 3? I'm a pro. Look at that. That was my internal voice. Look at that, right on the money. Thank you guys for coming today. I appreciate it. If you want to talk about this more, reach out, and I'm happy to talk about it. Thank you guys.
Thank you.